The impact of ancient Rome and the Romans on the planet is so profound that it has given rise to myths about them in our minds. Even now, we occasionally have a romanticized view of ancient Rome. It's a region where numerous battles were fought by knights clad in gold who rode chariots, and emperors who were fed luxurious wines and grapes. Rome in our minds, however, is not the same as Rome in reality. Life was not as glamorous as we had imagined. At this period, getting through a typical day was both a challenging and unpleasant endeavor. Let's travel back in time to ancient Rome and discover the top 10 ways that the ancient Romans lived. It appears the events that happen in the world today may have their roots in Rome. There was a good chance you would not make it out of the bathroom in ancient Rome, and it wasn't just because of the smell. The issue was that while people performed their business, animals that lived in sewage pipes may creep up on them and bite. However, the main problem in the situation was that the toilet frequently exploded because of the accumulation of methane, which occasionally ignited and detonated below people. To tackle this issue, the Romans turned to the magic spells in order to survive because these toilets were so perilous and life-threatening. They had claimed that since the spells they cast had the power to ward off demons, there was a good probability that they could also prevent bathroom explosions from happening. Some people would even carry their luck goddess, Fortuna, into the bathroom and make a wish before entering. Although their methods were significantly different from those used today, the Romans placed a high value on hygiene. The Romans had something they called xylospongum, or tessorium, which means sponge on a stick. The sponge on a stick was often used by those using public latrines, and they had to share it. We frequently see classical Rome as the height of Western civilization, and we even attempt to imitate some of its customs. However, the sponge on a stick is not one of those that is worth copying. Actually, the Romans of antiquity used this repugnant method as tissue. Isn't it difficult to imagine this? The ancient Romans, however, did this frequently. After using the restroom, they would rinse themselves off with a sponge dipped in salt water. The sponge was then rinsed and placed in the bucket for use by the next individual. Now that we have observed the peculiar Roman practice of pooping, how about their peeing habits? Pee was used in numerous ways by the Romans. The ancient Romans used to urinate in little pots at home and work, collecting their urine for later disposal in big jars on the sidewalk. Once a week, a crew would arrive to collect those large pots of pee and take them to a laundromat. Why? The Romans used their urination as a form of laundry detergent due to the ammonia it had. It was also used to whiten teeth, and some Romans even thought their urine had therapeutic qualities. Selling urine developed into such a lucrative industry that some would knock on doors carrying a large bucket and requesting people to fill it. As a result, their government had to enact taxes specifically for urine sales. The energy drinks available now taste good and come in various fruit flavors. The preference for energy drinks is a startling fact about ancient Roman culture. Goat excrement was used by the charioteers as an energy drink. Charioteers were given goat feces that had been boiled in vinegar or that had been pulverized into powder and mixed in with beverages. According to Pliny, more than anyone else, Emperor Nero was the only person who adored drinking goat excrement. Thus, the poor were not given the opportunity. Also, the Romans repaired wounds with goat dung instead of bandages because they lacked them. In Rome, people used goat dung to bandage their cuts and wounds, according to Pliny the Elder. According to Pliny, the best goat dung is collected in the spring and dried, but fresh goat dung may be used in an emergency. Is it possible that the Romans' terrible eating habits weren't limited to their dubious energy drink? The Romans reputedly vomited during enormous feasts so they could keep eating, though this following act is hotly contested. But for this unusual activity, they would always keep bowls nearby. For some reason, these formalities were not even worth their time. In certain households, people who would frequently throw up on the floor before continuing to eat as if nothing happened. The fact that Romans used gladiator blood as medicine is another revolting reality. People would consume gladiator blood to treat epilepsy because they thought it might cure the condition. Yes, it was consumed raw. It was startling to learn that this was the more polite approach, considering that other people would remove the gladiators' livers and consume them raw. People continued to drink the blood of beheaded prisoners after Rome outlawed the practice because it was so widely accepted. Oddly enough, some Roman doctors even claimed that the cure was effective. The assumption that the body is made up of 4 fluids, including blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, is an example of the basic approach to medicine that the Romans originally employed. Treatments typically focused on bringing these four fluids back into balance because the illness was thought to be caused by an imbalance of these fluids. The Romans drank gladiator blood, which is supposed to have had a strengthening effect for vigor. Dead gladiator blood was also occasionally collected and sold as medicine. The definition of beauty is something that constantly evolves, and the methods used to meet these standards can be pretty bizarre. But in the case of the Romans, this was revolting. Gladiators were once employed as apoplectic medicine, but not if they triumphed. Instead, the victorious gladiators were made into aphrodisiacs. Because soaps were scarce during the Roman era, athletes cleansed themselves by applying oil to their bodies and using a strigil to remove dead skin cells. These gladiators' perspiration and skin scrapings were later packaged in bottles and sold to women as an aphrodisiac. This may be the reason why women in ancient Rome applied it to their faces to attract male attention. It appears that the legacy of the Roman Empire on Earth extends beyond its architectural achievements. In Rome, penis artwork was common. They frequently displayed the male members with pride and frequently wore them around their necks. Young boys wearing necklaces that depicted the male genitalia were not unusual to see. Roman literature claims that this was done for more than aesthetic purposes, since wearing them would avoid harm from coming to the wearer. You were mistaken if you believed that was the end of it. To keep passengers safe, good luck penises were also painted in hazardous locations. However, this is a more refined example of this art. There were works of art in locations like Pompeii that were so dirty that it took hundreds of years before anyone could view them because they had to be kept in a hidden area. Even in more contemporary times, the town was full of some of the most bizarre works of art ever created by humans, such as an erotic statue of Pan sexually assaulting a goat. The town is also teeming with brothels. In fact, when one strolls through Pompeii's streets, a penis is carved into the pavement, its tip pointing to the direction of the closest brothel. Given that birth control pills are by no means a recent invention, the Romans further cement their history in medicine. The method by which the ancient Romans produced their unique brand of birth control medication was extremely peculiar. According to physician Soranus, it aids in preventing conception to smear the orifice of the uterus all over before with olive oil, honey, cedar resin, or the juice of a balsam tree, alone or together with white lead or with moist cerate containing myrtle oil and white lead, or before the act with moist alum, or with galbanum together with wine, or to put a lock of fine wool into the orifice of the uterus. This technique was risky, strange, and offensive, even though it sometimes worked to limit uterine access. The Roman Empire was a terrible place to live, but if you can get past the revolting ways they lived, you can find a smart culture that invented most of what they had. Which of the following facts do you find disgusting? And what do you think would have changed if you had been living at that time? Do you believe that, despite their noteworthy accomplishments, the Romans led a disgusting lifestyle? What are your thoughts on this? Comment on them in the space provided below.